The Hidden Cost of Childhood Maltreatment, 12 Lifelong Effects. Childhood is meant to be a time of growth, play, and learning, but for many, it's marked by maltreatment, whether physical or emotional, that leaves deep psychological scars. A lot of times we forget the emotional aspect, the psychological aspect. A lot of times when we think of maltreatment, we think of physical abuse, but it goes a lot further than that. Even, in fact, neglect or being present and not being physically present, but not emotionally and psychologically present. All of these have negative psychological effects and leave, like it says here, scars. The impact of childhood maltreatment doesn't fade with time. It often intensifies, silently shaping the way we think, feel, and behave for the rest of our lives. It usually intensifies because we become emotionally illiterate, when we're not able to articulate our feelings, because a lot of the trauma is where we're left in a situation where something bad is happening to us. We're put in a certain situation, but we can't get out of it. We feel stuck. This is a big part of trauma. So we bury it, create our own Pandora's box full of emotions, and they tend to spill over and boil to the surface later in life. Which it says here intensifies, which silently shapes the way we think, feel, and behave, because our underlying trauma, our subconscious drives our conscious actions and thoughts. So something really to take serious. I know it's, especially in the West, it's kind of unmanly to learn to be in touch with our feelings. This is not so much how we always think about it as, getting in touch with your feelings means you're weak, or, it means you got to sit in a corner and cry. Doesn't mean that. It just means that you're aware of what you're feeling and you can articulate it and you can control it. You can be in the moment and understand where your feelings are coming from, and you can control yourself. For example, losing your temper. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said that the man is the one who can control himself in a fit of anger. Not when he's, slightly irritated or, a little bit upset or in a bad mood, but someone who can control themselves in a fit of anger. So, for example, if you stub your toe on a toy that your kid left on the ground, do you immediately explode cursing and who left this here? And, do you lose your temper? This is where, in these situations or in other situations where you can become very angry, you're able to control yourself, be in the moment. You understand your feelings. You're not just running on autopilot by your subconscious. So the article explores 12 studies that reveal just how profoundly childhood maltreatment affects later life. Mental health issues are up 150%. Hostile parenting styles increase the chances of children developing mental health issues by 150%. Some of those health issues being unable to create lasting relationships. Sometimes even trauma has been shown to actually lower a child's IQ, lowers their self-esteem, their ability to succeed in life. And ultimately, if we just give our kids attention, the negative reinforcement, if we just spank them, hit them, whatever, say something verbally or use intimidation, then we're setting them up to require that that type of regulation when they get older. They're going to always need some kind of authority figure putting them in their place. They're not learning self-regulation. They're not learning how to regulate themselves because we're not telling them why they shouldn't do this or do that. We just spank them, put them in timeout, get out of my face. We don't really want to put in the effort of parenting. We just want to police them, control them, and then it just doesn't turn out well in the long run. Even if a person seems to have success, maybe they have a business, they seem to be doing well worldly wise, but psychologically they may not be. And they may pass down this type of behavior to their kids, to their wives, etc. So it's something that really takes it takes self-reflection. You have to self-audit yourself, look at yourself. Where are you? How are you treating your children? Maybe you think back on how you were treated as a child and see if you're passing this on to your kids. Hostile parenting can involve routine physical punishment, regularly shouting at children, breaking down their self-esteem, and handing out random punishments on a whim. I see this all the time. Grew up in DC, and it's very popular, especially in Black communities, where children are scolded, hit, just for talking, just for moving, for doing anything, really. And then later, comedians kind of glorify it almost, It's like a badge of honor to say that you were spanked when you were growing up. Like, I know I used to have to go pick out my own switch when my grandmother wanted to whip me. We laugh at these things, but, deep down at the time, especially, or when we think back, we don't really see that the punishment didn't really fit the crime in a lot of situations. And I see a lot of parents, especially young single mothers who are stressed out. Maybe they have bad feelings towards their ex-husband or their child's father, and they see their child's father in their kid's face. So they take out a lot of aggression on them. A lot of parents just want their child to just sit there and be quiet. But this is stifling their learning abilities. Children learn by looking at things, touching things, smelling things. Toddlers even go as far as, tasting things. This is how they learn. So if we tell them just sit and be quiet, it's very difficult, and it goes against their nature because they want to explore, they want to learn. And so then you add to that when they get older, when they're in school and they're unable to pay attention because they've been traumatized so much but that learning is still in them. But they're, again, in the class, they're told to sit still, pay attention. So at home, they're getting that. In school, they're getting that. And it just really sets them up for some difficult times as they get older. In many ways, psychological hostility can be as bad as or worse than physical hostility, studies have frequently found. Yeah, psychological abuse is more scarring or more detrimental than physical, because the psychological things, like I said, we have a hard time articulating how we feel or what happened, so we just bury it. Whereas a physical abuse, it heals. You have the mental scars with that, of course, being hit by someone that you trust. The child's parents are its whole world. So if the parents turn on them, it's as if the whole world is turning on them. It removes all sense of security from them, because all children are doing is trying to find themselves in the world, find their place in the world, find their identity, and all the while being abused, and many times for where they don't even know why. So psychological hostility, as they're saying here, can be worse than physical hostility. In fact, I read in a study that even if you're physically present, but you're not psychologically or emotionally present, so in other words, you're there, but you're not really there, can be more detrimental to your child than physical abuse or molestation. And so it's very important to be aware, especially if you have a cell phone, if you're a parent that finds yourself scrolling all the time, you really need to be careful about scrolling around your kids, especially if they're trying to get your attention. They learn how to treat you by how you treat them. And children, even though we don't think they really get affected by it, when a child sees us scrolling on our phone while they're sitting next to us, they see the phone as being more important to you than them, even if it's subconscious. So this is something that we really have to keep in mind, even when we're around each other. Even as adults, we know you don't scroll on your phone while someone's talking to you. It's rude. If you're sitting, imagine, you're talking to someone and they're sitting like, yeah, and they're on their phone. You can see this even at a store. If you walk up to the cashier in a store and you're on your phone, you can almost always see that they're kind of annoyed or irritated by the fact that you're on your phone while they're asking you if you want a bag. Is this all that you're going to get? Or, whatever their small chit chat is. If you're on your phone while responding, and especially if you don't look up at them, they feel alienated, and you can see it, and it bothers them most of the time. So for your child, it's even worse because you're their parent. They want to be your world as you are theirs. So don't scroll around your kids, especially if they're trying to engage with you. And because you're just teaching them that the phone is more important than them. And then in turn, they can end up following your footsteps and wanting to be on the phone all the time too. And then you look like a hypocrite when you're telling them you're on the phone too much. And then they resent you. Aggressive and antisocial behavior. The more children are spanked, the more aggressive and antisocial they are. And again, that's like I mentioned, a lot of times they don't even know why it's happening. I never spanked my kids. I never laid my hands on my kids. I've always had the approach that It's much better to teach them why they should or shouldn't do things so that they understand, even if it doesn't stick, because, kids' brains are still developing. The mind doesn't fully develop until around age 25, especially the PFC that controls impulsive behavior. That's why kids are going to want to do what they want to do. They want to follow their desires. And so I never spanked my kids, and they turned out okay. Alhamdulillah. What is termed spanking has similar effects on children as physical abuse. The conclusions come from studies conducted over 50 years, which included more than 160,000 children. The researchers also found that being spanked was linked to more mental health problems and cognitive difficulties later on. Again, being put in a situation of pain where you have no recourse, there's nothing you can do about it. This creates trauma. That's the definition of trauma, is that you're put in a situation to where you have no control, and you pretty much hold it in, and it stays in your subconscious, giving you mental health problems and difficulties later on, especially if you don't try to get them resolved. Flat emotions. People who experience maltreatment as children are more likely to develop the personality trait of alexithymia. Alexithymia, which literally means no words for emotions, is a difficulty identifying and describing emotions. Emotional illiteracy. That's basically what this is. Maltreated children are more likely to grow up without positive examples of how to react to stress or express their emotions. Again, when they're abused or maltreated, they don't have any type of self-regulation or emotional intelligence. They just know to bottle everything up. And this compounds over time. They just take it. In fact, if you're somebody who's ever traumatized as a child, you'll find that you're often a people pleaser. You kind of just go with the flow because this is what you've had to endure and had to do growing up to survive and to try to reduce the amount of maltreatment that you were getting. Without that, they tend to react violently or aggressively to negative events or just shut down with totally flat emotions. So fight or flight. They either fight or they flee or they freeze or they fawn. It's basically, at the end of the day, it's a stress response and how they respond. Memories of abuse. How childhood abuse is processed and remembered is more injurious to mental health than the experience of abuse itself. This conclusion is suggested by a study that compared people's objective experience of childhood abuse and trauma with their subjective experience. It found that people who reported childhood abuse, of which there was no official records, sometimes had worse mental health than those whose abuse had been officially recorded but who had no recall of the events. Interesting. This suggests that it is in the years following abuse that the real psychological damage is done. So it being unresolved, not talking to someone, not getting professional help, someone to talk to, not fully immersing yourself in the deen. This is so important. Salah and all these things are a precursor to healing. It's a spiritual healing, obviously, when we practice what we know from the deen, but also speaking to someone and getting professional guidance as you're talking so that you can learn to articulate your emotions. This is the benefit of therapy. Therapy isn't just to go and, like a lot of people think, oh, I'm not just going to go cry to somebody else is going to know all my problems. No, therapy is very valuable because by talking about your experiences, talking about what you've been through or what you're going through, you learn to articulate your feelings. And once you're able to articulate the feelings, then you know what you're feeling. You can control your feelings. You can control your thoughts and your actions. This is what they call healing. Anxiety, depression, and suicidality. Bullying as a child has a more damaging effect on adult mental health than parental abuse. A study has found very severe outcomes to bullied children. I know I was bullied. I know a lot of people wear the bully badge who grew up in the 80s and 90s. Bullying was a normal part of my life for as long as I can remember. I think my youngest memory of being bullied, I was 7. A couple of boys in the neighborhood who were a little bit older than me decided to put me in a full Nelson, and then one of them asking the one who was in front of me, asking the guy in the full Nelson, where should I hit him? and fight or flight kicked in, obviously. But I didn't fight, flee, freeze, or fawn. I acted. I just said, "Oh, my chest. I can't breathe, my chest." And so the kid let go, like, "Oh my God, what's happening here? Is this kid having a heart attack? What's happening?" And then I ran away. So I kind of played possum / I don't know what animal fakes being in pain, but that's what I did. And I just have many memories of being bullied growing up. And so if a parent is bullying their child, which I also experienced from time to time from my dad, this is worse than being bullied, in my opinion, by a stranger, because this is someone you trust. This is someone who you love and adore, who's going against you. I think, to me, there's nothing worse than a parent bullying their child. This is really setting them up to fail in life. We just have to make sure that we're treating our kids as the love of our life, as they should be, but it has to show in action. We can't be hands-off parents and at the same time telling our kids, "Oh, we love you more than anything in the world," because then they may think, or even subconsciously deduce that, wow, if you love me more than anything in the world, I'd hate to see who you don't love or who you like. So actions speak louder than words, as the old saying says. Professor Dieter Wolk, who led the research, said the mental health outcomes we were looking for included anxiety, depression, or suicidal tendencies. Our results showed those who were bullied were more likely to suffer from mental health problems than those who were maltreated. Being both bullied and maltreated also increased the risk of overall mental health problems, anxiety, and depression in both groups. And a lot of maltreated children become bullies. We know this. So bullies can create bullies. The worst influence that your child can have are other kids. We always talk about don't talk to strangers. We're always worried about adults, but really we need to watch who our kids are being friends with. Schizophrenia. Otherwise healthy people who experience emotional abuse as children are at much higher risk of schizophrenia-like symptoms in adulthood. Schizophrenia is usually almost always triggered by trauma. So if a person's being maltreated or abused, that can most definitely trigger someone who is prone to schizophrenia or who has a higher likelihood of pulling that schizophrenic trigger, as they say. Symptoms of schizophrenia include hearing voices, paranoia, social withdrawal, and confused thinking. People with schizophrenia can find it very hard to make plans, and their memories can be poor. Schizophrenia, along with personality disorders, is considered one of the most disabling of mental health conditions. And as far as the confused thinking, a large part of schizophrenia is also that it's a language mental illness. They tend to run on super tangents. So a lot of times you'll see people who are schizophrenic talk a lot, their sentences run on, ideas run on into each other. And so for someone who's, not schizophrenic, who's listening, it may sound incoherent, but it's largely a language issue. Speech. Perfectionism. High parental expectations and constant criticism are both linked to increased perfectionism among college students. Unfortunately, high levels of perfectionism can also lead to elevated neuroticism, depression, and anxiety, as well as an increased suicide risk. The personality trait of perfectionism is also strongly linked to developing obsessive-compulsive disorder. Perfectionism involves being highly self-critical, constantly striving to meet the standards of others, typically parents or mentors, and being unsure about the efficacy of one's own actions. I personally have a perfectionist attitude for myself. I don't think really anyone put pressure on me to be a perfectionist. But even struggling with this channel, even to get videos out, the video is never good enough. I want to write blogs. I write a blog. The blogs are never good enough. So a lot of it can be growing up with a lot of disappointment or being told what you've been doing is not good enough. I didn't really get too much of anyone saying that's not good enough, but perfectionism does come with, just feeling you're not good enough. And it's never good enough if you have a perfectionist mindset. It's not to be confused with someone who just who has high standards. It's being a perfectionist to the degree of analysis paralysis, of just not being able to move forward, not making progress. Disrespectful and delinquent. Authoritarian parents are more likely to raise children who are disrespectful and delinquent. Parents who are authoritarian tend to have very high standards for their children, punish them severely, and also cold and non-nurturing. So this is like almost like raising your child like a slave or like a soldier. This doesn't make them tough. It just makes them either weak or disrespectful and delinquent. You're not creating strong children by mistreating them. And we know this from the prophet, peace be upon him. He never mistreated his children, his wives, anyone, treated them with the utmost respect and love. And they all grew up very strong and very well-known, successful Muslims. They have no patience with bad behavior. They don't trust their children, and they do not negotiate. The problem is that children do not see them as legitimate authority figures, which is what creates problems. That's why the children can become defiant. And a lot of times if we use this negative reinforcement, that's better than no attention. So if you're not really giving your child attention, you only give them strong emotional attention when they're doing wrong, you're teaching them to do wrong more often. So it's something to really consider, something to think about. You have to, again, be in the moment, understand your emotions so that you can have control of your emotions and so that your children can become who you want them to become. Dr. Rick Trinkner, the study's first author, said, when children consider their parents to be legitimate authority figures, they trust the parent and feel they have an obligation to do what their parents tell them to do. This is how we have our relationship with Allah. We don't fear Allah in the sense of just pure fear. We just have the fear that we don't want to disappoint Allah because we love Allah so much and we respect Allah's authority so much that we want to be the best that we can be before him, almost kind of show off our good deeds to him and impress Allah, so to speak. This is how children should see us. But if they see you, if they resent you and see you as just some bully or some drill sergeant or it's just some cold guardian and not a loving parent, they can start to actually become more and more disobedient. This is an important attribute for any authority figure to possess, as the parent does not have to rely on a system of rewards and punishments to control behavior, and the child is more likely to follow the rules when the parent is not physically present. This is the important part, self-regulation. You don't want your kids just to do what they're supposed to do because you're watching, because then that raises adults like many of us who commit sin as soon as we get alone or think no one's watching. We know Allah is watching, but we don't care. Otherwise, we wouldn't sin, but that's not possible. So if we teach our children and they feel secure to fail or to do wrong and to learn from it, they'll do what needs to be done when you're not around. Fearful. People brought up by harsh parents can become fearful adults. Harsh parents tend to spank, shake, and often get angry at children. Researchers observe critical differences in the fear processing circuits of the brain among adolescents who had been subject to harsh parenting. And this comes just from the simple fact that our brain, to create homeostasis and to keep a balance, it's always pulling in the opposite direction of what's being processed. So if you're instilling fear, then the opposite process is going to try to get the balance. Is going to be kind of more of a depressant state or an opiate type state where they're excited and they're in fear, and then the brain is trying to get them back to the balance by creating certain chemicals to calm them down. Well, they're going to be below baseline on the calm side, and they can become hyper vigilant and super sensitive, and like it says here, become fearful. Anxious people in particular tend to become very sensitive to threats later on when they receive harsh parenting. Early spanking has been linked to greater negative emotions such as irritability, other research has already shown. Smaller brain structures. Harsh parenting practices when children are small is linked to smaller brain structures in adolescence. Frequently getting angry, yelling, shaking, and hitting children has long-term consequences for children's brain development. Unfortunately, many of these harsh practices are considered normal by parents around the world. So true. As we talked about earlier, spanking and hitting and all of these things, it's almost worn as a badge of honor. And if people who grew up without that can feel left out of the conversation, thinking, well, shoot, I wasn't abused. And so they can't really relate. And then sometimes they'll even be teased by it. We need to get out of this mindset. This is not the way of a Muslim. The Prophet, peace be upon him, none of his kids have stories of him intimidating them, beating them, hitting them, bullying them. So we need to get out of this kind of Western mindset. And there's other cultures that do this as well. It's not just a Western thing. I'm just saying Western because I live here in the West. We have to get out of this mindset that it's okay to physically abuse or discipline our children. It's not necessary. And if it is, it's because you made it necessary. You've conditioned them to be that way. The study did not include children who had suffered serious abuse, such as sexual, physical, or emotional abuse. Dr. Sabrina Sufferin, the study's first author, said the implications go beyond changes in the brain. I think what's important is for parents and society to understand that the frequent use of harsh parenting practices can harm a child's development. We're talking about their social and emotional development as well as their brain development. A shorter life. Mothers who use a cold parenting style may shorten their children's lives and increase their risk of disease. Cold parents are emotionally distant and unresponsive to their child's needs. They tend to be dismissive, indifferent, or even neglectful towards their child. The mother is the most important person in a child's life for both boys and girls. If the mother is suffering postpartum depression or going through her own trauma and it's not being resolved, this is just going to get passed down to the children. Mothers are supposed to be loving, nurturing, 24/7. All the studies show that the more they hug and kiss their kids, the more well-developed, the more well-rounded their children become. There is no spoiling your child. This is, again, something tied to maybe poor history and something happening in the past, maybe from certain cultures where you had to raise your kid to be a certain way to survive tribal conflict or war, what have you. But if you don't fall into those categories, it isn't necessary, because then you just raise someone who already has PTSD without even being in the war. Mothers just need to really be loving and caring to their children. And if you think that you're not, if you feel that you're not, or you have issues being affectionate and loving to your children, go find someone to talk to. Go find a good therapist. I know good Muslim therapists are in very short supply. Inshallah, we'll get the numbers up because it's very much needed. But really try to find someone, maybe even online, buy some books on parenting, how to resolve trauma, and really do it for yourself and for your kids. The researchers found that children of cold mothers tend to have telomeres, a component of DNA, 25% shorter. Telomeres are protective caps at the end of each strand of DNA. Shorter telomeres are linked to a higher risk of disease and accelerated aging. And we know telomeres are a significant measurement of health. A lot of people have these tested after doing weight training or doing some significant diet to improve their health. This is a great way of knowing just how healthy you are. So if it's shortened by 25%, that's very significant. Less pleasure and enthusiasm. Early life stress decreases the adult ability to feel enthusiasm and experience pleasure. That makes sense. I mean, how can you be enthusiastic about something when you're always being mistreated, or even not even punished for doing good, but not recognized for doing good? You just kind of get a meh when you do something good, but you get a big response when you do something wrong. You're being conditioned to not really be enthusiastic. I mean, what do you have to look forward to? This is one of the reasons that experiencing stress early in life is a major risk for depression. Studies show that neglected or abused children are often twice as likely to experience depression later in life. One of the causes is thought to how neglect and abuse affects the way the brain processes reward. So I hope this has been beneficial. I hope with it, as an ummah, we can become the yardstick for how to raise children. We have to make sure we're not following certain cultures, certain countries, certain family practices. If we just follow the deen, we'll do everything right. If we just live the way that the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his wives lived, we'll do everything right. We'll have no problems raising our kids. And so we also have to keep in mind that if we want Allah's mercy, we have to be merciful to our kids. So it's super important that we're there as role models for our kids. We want to treat our kids the way that we want them to treat their kids. We want them to be confident and secure and religious. We have to give them all of the tools. We have to nurture them and raise them in a way that's going to facilitate that. So inshallah, this was beneficial. Subscribe, like, all the things, share. Inshallah, if you found it beneficial, get a share in the reward, inshallah. And until next time, may Allah reward you for being curious and keep tying your camel. Assalamu alaikum.